it occurs, perhaps, Courtney, they're thinking the same thing that you expressed earlier, that what they don't want is for this size crowd to still be there in the darkness of a Friday night.
Right, and yeah, and just to go back to what you said, Russ, about the reporting on police telling protesters that they should go home or they could be arrested, that is something that we as a news organization had put out on our Fox 5 Atlanta. We put that out there a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure exactly which one of the members of our team is hearing that, and I'd like to get more clarification on exactly what that was. But I'd like you to look here at this crowd of people. Right in the middle, you can see the white shirt and the dark hair of Atlanta's police chief, Erica Shields. It does look like it's her. If I'm not mistaken, but I do believe that's her, I'm pretty sure. I
think you're right.
And quite a few people surrounding her, but it looks like she's communicating with the people in that group. You see someone holding a sign that says "White Silence" right in front of Atlanta's police chief. Quite a few people around her.
Yeah.
At least 50 people, it looks like, but there are some officers in the crowd sort of forming a barricade around her with their bodies. But, obviously hoping that doesn't turn, doesn't go left. But so far it looks like she's just communicating calmly with one of the protesters.
Yeah, I think it's a proud moment for our city to see Chief Erica Shields stand there and presumably not only talk but listen. Because that's what this crowd wants. They want to be heard. That's what the crowd in Minneapolis wants. The vast, vast majority of the folks in that crowd had no intention of looting the Target or burning down the police station. They wanted to express their frustration. Of course, there were people who were bent on taking it in that left turn direction, as you point out. But if anything's going to diffuse this, it might be someone of real authority, like the police chief, someone who is sickened the way they are sickened, who has expressed that publicly, to say, hey, look, I'm as outraged as you are. It was wrong. And I pledge to do everything that I can do to make sure that kind of behavior never happens in the city of Atlanta. I imagine that some kind of conversation like that is going on right now, in addition to obviously her listening to them and trying to convince them that it's in everybody's interest for this to end the way it is now, in a peaceful way, and for people to go home feeling as though they've been heard.
Yeah, I think that's so key, Russ, because it almost looks from here. I mean, I know we're looking from a chopper that's way up in the air, but it does look like the more you communicate with people, the more the situation diffuses. And people, when they can use their voices, they don't feel that they have to resort to other means like violence or, causing trouble and whatnot. But it does look like by her talking, it is doing some good. At least it's keeping things calm for now. It does look like there are some members of the media in that group. I don't think that is one of our people, but it's a mixed group. You've got protesters, the police chief there at the center, and you have several police officers around her. And now, from what I can see, a couple members of the media, they're covering what's going on from the ground.
Again, this right out in front of the CNN Center. This is the scrum that's closer to Centennial Olympic Park. So what we're looking at is the road between the park and CNN Center. And there you go. You can see. I'm going to take that back. This is on the road that's leading up to that police barricade, and that's the parking deck that we've been referencing earlier. But she's been there now, I think, for about 20 minutes. Walked up to survey the scene, and the more people she talks to, who then go and share her message with other protesters, looks like we got some movement going on here, some activity. We're watching this like you are at home, folks, so we don't know why those folks are running or where they're running to.
Yeah.
But certainly this has been the first kind of dramatic change in the circumstance since really the last 45 minutes to an hour.
And it looks like they're leaving, Russ. It's a couple of stragglers going into the park, but they look to be just getting away from the situation, for whatever reason. Who knows why, but certainly a large number of people just ran away from the position that they've been maintaining for at least an hour, possibly more at this point. As you know, we near the 7 o'clock hour now, and this started well before 5 o'clock when we came on the air. So it does look like the group in the park is diminishing. So, you know, possibly the end to the formal protest that was planned. We're going to go back to our Alex Whitler. She's in the park. She's been there for the last few hours covering the protest. And it would be good, Alex, to get your perspective, just some more context on, you know, perhaps why those people were running away, if you can tell.
Yeah, I just asked someone, her exact words were, "We're running from police." That's all I have. We, of course, were trying to move out of the way too, just not understanding what was going on, if there was a threat to our safety and anyone out here. But I can tell you that, to put things into perspective for you, Chris, if you could follow me, the park was this way, and that's where we saw multiple people, of course, protesters here, but that dispersed about maybe, would you say, 15, 20 minutes ago? And then from this direction, this is where the start of the backside of the CNN Center would be. So not the side where you would see those large red CNN letters. And so just a few moments ago, not even 2 minutes ago, we saw what appeared to be a flood of people running this way. No context as to what that was about, except for that one woman who said that they were running from police. But we've been sort of on standby, trying to figure out where to go, where the best view would be for you all. But again, if we could pan this way, you remember around 6 o'clock, 6:30, 6:45, throughout that entire 6 o'clock hour, we were giving you reports from this peaceful protest that has since ended here. And then this is what has sort of flared up. That might not be the best word to use at this point, but it's obviously a fluid situation. We don't know what caused that running, but we do know that there was quite a bit of it for a very short period of time. Multiple people. This wasn't just like 5 or 10 people. This was a large swarm of people that took out running. So we're going to try to move around, see what's happening, and get a better sense of what's taking place. Back to you guys.
Alex, thanks very much. Let me share with you a tweet from Governor Brian Kemp. He says, currently there are thousands of Georgians gathered in Atlanta to demand justice for George Floyd's death. It is a powerful moment for our state and country. We encourage protesters to exercise their constitutional rights safely, especially in light of COVID-19. So that's from Governor Kemp within the last half an hour. As you continue to look at these protests in downtown Atlanta, hard to imagine we didn't see anything specific that would have explained why folks took off running in the direction of Centennial Olympic Park. But we haven't seen any confrontation yet between police and those protesters. The crowd there in Centennial Park has dispersed to quite an extent. But it seemed as though that running, Courtney, happened in sort of the same general area where Police Chief Erica Shields was having that conversation with a group of people.
Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about how well things were going as Chief Shields was communicating with those protesters. She was surrounded by them, but it was peaceful and calm. And you can't tell where she is now because there are so many people here in the picture. But you're right, it looked like a whole bunch of them started running from that area in the direction of the park. And now it looks as if many people are just peacefully leaving. I did hear Chief Shields said on the radio, we don't want this to be an arrest fest. Sort of just letting people know that she is going to allow these protests to go on, but, you know, as long as this remains peaceful. But, you know, stating the obvious, which is they don't want to be forced to arrest people. They would like them to go home and for this all to end peacefully.
Well, I'm seeing some reporting now that Chief Shields has been saying to the protesters that they're allowed to stay on the street as long as they want. No curfew in place, that she doesn't want to have any arrests. The city is shut down because of COVID-19 concerns for the most part. I mean, the reopening has begun, but really people's confidence hasn't grown to the extent that they're willing to come out in huge numbers. I'm sorry, Suzanne, say that again to me, our producer. All right. My understanding is that they are shouting, "Heads up, don't shoot," at this moment. "Heads up, don't shoot" is the chant that is being directed toward those police officers in that line there in the middle of your screen that's crossing the road that comes from Centennial Park up toward Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
Yeah, it sounds almost like "hands up, don't shoot." I wonder if that might be what they're saying. That's the sort of the phrase that came out of the 2014 Ferguson protests with Michael Brown, but not exactly sure if it was heads up or hands up, don't shoot. But obviously these protesters have chanted different things. "I can't breathe," you know, "Black Lives Matter," "White silence is violence." These are the kinds of things that people are saying as they try to just get out what they are feeling, sort of get their message across, and they have every right to do so peacefully. But you do not have the right to cause trouble. So far, we have not seen that on a widespread scale. But it does look like, Russ, people are still gathered in a circular formation back where they were surrounding Chief Shields, but I can't see if she's still in the middle of that group.
I can't see either, but my guess is that she is, for what little that guess is worth, because it looked as though progress was being made, that people were gathering around, not only the media, but folks who were part of the protest, because some of them were holding signs, and they were exchanging views with the police chief, who apparently has told them, again, that they are allowed to stay on the street as long as they want, so long as it remains peaceful. And perhaps that will have a calming effect on this crowd. It looks as though it has dispersed to some extent. And again, the police officers who are on the scene here, and you can see the ones in their yellow vests, they're the most visible, but behind them, that whole road between there and Mercedes-Benz Stadium is covered with police vehicles, some military-style vehicles, as Courtney pointed out earlier, a corrections bus. My guess is quite a few of those police officers, the vast majority, agree with the sentiments of these protesters, that what happened in Minneapolis was completely and totally unacceptable, a crime, in fact.
See a car moving there on the right side of the screen.
Yeah.
And, you know, not clear what the goal is here, but there's someone standing on the roof of that car, looks like holding some kind of a camera. Maybe to get a better vantage point, I don't know, but the car is moving towards the crowd, which is not necessarily the safest thing, but it is going pretty slowly there. It looks like another line has sort of formed between the original line of police by CNN Center and Centennial Olympic Park. So now the direction of the crowd has changed. Looks like they're sort of their goal now might be to get in the other direction than they were before. There are not too many people there facing off with that police line, that original line where they were for the last couple hours.
It's a waiting game at this point. The police have made it clear that they are going to be patient. They're going to listen. And as long as the protesters are peaceful, as they have been for the last hour, they can stand there as long as they want and chant whatever they want, make their voices heard in that peaceful protest, that legacy of peaceful protest that Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom talked about. We've seen people holding signs that say, "We don't need cops," "Black skin, not probable cause," "Silence is violence," and "Black Lives Matter," of course. Many of those in the crowd. We're looking again at the CNN Center there. You can see the CNN logo, and the parking lot across the street has been taken over by police who are standing up there on the roof to make sure that people don't go down into the gulch, so that this stays contained. And there are police vehicles behind the bicycle officers. They are amassed in case they're needed, and so far they haven't been, and we hope that will be the case as the hours drag on.
Yeah, it does look like the crowd has sort of shifted, but still, you know, not moving too much. They're just gathering there, and people are chanting and saying different things and holding their signs, and you know, it looks like everybody at least is on the same page, so you don't have any tension between different groups of protesters, which is a dynamic that, quite frankly, hasn't really been seen. Maybe here and there in social media, you see people debating what they feel is or isn't justice or injustice, but as far as the protests, it seems like everybody's sort of on the same page. And like you said, Russ, it's been a diverse group, people from all walks of life, different faiths, different ethnicities, kind of coming together and all, wanting the same thing and asking for the same thing with these protests. So at least there is not the dynamic of people on the other side of a topic or an issue where you've seen in past events where that might become kind of a problem, when you have different factions and different groups. But so far, I mean, they seem to be just standing there and they are not moving in one direction or another.
It's almost 7:10 on a Friday night. On a normal Friday night, we'd be finishing up the first segment of The Road to November, but you're watching continuing coverage on Fox 5 News of massive protests in downtown Atlanta. Made at one point to the state capitol this afternoon. If you're just joining us, we have shared this with you before, but it's worth sharing again. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, this is her statement about what's happening here. When lives and the conscience of this nation are at peril, we as a people are expected to exercise our constitutional rights to peacefully assemble and have our voices heard. Atlanta embodies these values, and I encourage all who exercise these rights to remember Atlanta's legacy of peaceful protests leading to progress. Of course, a major part of that legacy is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That sort of goes without saying, but his message of nonviolence is especially relevant as we watch what's going on here. It has been a nonviolent protest so far. His son, Martin III, appeared on cable news today and expressed the opinion that he was glad that Derek Chauvin has been arrested and charged with manslaughter and third-degree murder in Minneapolis. He expressed his belief that the other 3 officers ought to be charged too, and that perhaps prosecutors should consider more serious charges. The third-degree murder charge against Chauvin, the former officer in Minneapolis who had his knee on George Floyd's neck, implies reckless disregard for George's life, but does not imply an intent to kill him. Some people have pointed out that Floyd was unconscious for almost 3 minutes while Chauvin continued to keep his knee on that man's neck. So there are those certainly in this crowd and in other crowds who have expressed the belief that the charges should be more serious. And the prosecutor in Minneapolis has left that door open as the investigation continues.
Yeah, just about 20 seconds ago, our Alex Whitler, who's there on the ground reporting for us, she's at the corner of Marietta Street Northwest and Centennial Olympic Park Drive. And she mentioned what we saw about 5 or 10 minutes ago now, which was a group of people start running away from the initial standoff point with police. They moved back towards the park. So she mentioned that. She also said there's music playing, people are dancing, and every once in a while they will allow cars to pass through because, again, that is an intersection between the CNN Center and the park. And there were a few cars we saw earlier when that camera on the left was pointed more towards that intersection, but I almost caught a glimpse of someone moving a trash can. But now it looks like where we're looking now, there's a group of people and they're all sort of clapping, or it looks like they have their phones up. They're recording something. There have been speeches going on. People have been making impassioned speeches about, why they're there, why they're protesting. Let's get a better idea of what's going on the ground. We'll go back to Alex Whitler right now. Alex.
Yeah, hey there, Courtney. Things are definitely changing as we speak. Just within the past maybe 45 seconds, people started moving. So there was a good period of time that people were just sort of planted here. There was music playing. Every once in a while, you'd see someone dancing. I would like to point your attention to the people standing at the top of this parking garage. I'm hearing people clapping. It's hard to make sense of what exactly is happening right now, but if you take a look, people are coming from Centennial Olympic Park Drive. and turning onto Marietta Street Northwest. And this protest seems as though it's sort of migrating down the street here. Again, you hear some dancing, you hear some clapping, some cheering, but for the most part, this is completely peaceful. No one seems riled up in a violent manner at all. This really just seems to be a whole bunch of people broadcasting this themselves to their own social media followings. Again, it's difficult to determine what exactly sparked the running that we came across within the past 10 or 15 minutes. But you would never know that people were running from the look of things here by the McCormick and Schmick's. Well, there goes a trash can. That's really all I can say. There's just so much going on, as you can imagine. It's not even clear how many people would be out here. Definitely hundreds. Not sure if it's peaked into the thousands at this point. This trash can continues to roll down the street. It's just depending on where you're standing and where you're looking, you might get a glimpse of something different. But people aren't chanting, people aren't screaming, people aren't running as they were. See, this young woman's got a sign, but the majority of people have masks. Again, this situation continues to develop. This is just from one corner of the street. We know that things were different on the other side of the CNN Center where those large CNN letters are. So because we're just two people on the side of the street, to be completely honest with you, we can only tell you what's happening at this corner. I'm not sure if we have a bird's eye view from Skyfox 5, but things are definitely changing by the second.
Well, Alex,
all right, people are running again. I'm not sure what's happening.
It looks like there are people who are running again in your direction because where she said she was is right there at that intersection. Alex, if you can still hear me, what are people telling you? The folks that you're talking to or who are part of this protest, what are they saying to you?
You know, people have been really calm at this point, Russ. This hasn't been an ongoing conversation of how people necessarily feel. It's been more so of chanting taking place. I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to try to ask these people what's going on with this trash can, to be completely honest. But as of right now, what we keep seeing, that repeat is running. And people have told me that they're running from police. So we're keeping our distance for safety purposes, not saying that this is a dangerous situation at all, but just to be completely honest with you, we are on one corner of the street. We would like to move forward to get a sense of what people are running from on that side of the road, on the Centennial Olympic Park Drive, going toward the other side of the CNN Center. So again, it's just one of those situations in which you stand on the ground and you try to establish what's taking place.
Yeah, Alex, please get to a safe location, and we will check back with you when it is a better time for you to do so, and also see if you can get us some kind of an update on why people are running. But you're right, and we saw in the images from Skyfox 5 that quite a few people ran away. You heard Alex say they were running from police, and now you see this. The energy of this crowd has shifted. You can see that there's graffiti on the windows of the CNN Center. People are throwing things. It looks like they're water bottles, but it's really not easy to tell exactly what those items are. But now it looks like the crowd is throwing things at police. You know, these people clearly are not running away. They're standing their ground, and they're actually making their way towards police, throwing items at police officers.
Yeah, you know, it's a shame to say, but there are going to be some people in this crowd who are going to be disappointed if there's not a confrontation tonight. And that's just human nature, unfortunately. Clearly, it's not the majority of the people, or even a small minority. It's a tiny minority, and let's hope that it stays that way, of the people who are looking for a confrontation with police and looking for something more than just an opportunity to say what they want to say and be heard. But yeah, obviously some things are being thrown in the direction of Atlanta police, who bear no responsibility. I hope it goes without saying for what happened in Minneapolis or in several other places. Of course, we'll be watching to see what happens as this night wears on. But this has been the first time in about an hour and 15 minutes when it looks like there is at least the potential for a confrontation between a large group on one side and police on the other.
Yeah, this is different. You know, this is different from what we've seen. This started as a peaceful protest that originated at Centennial Olympic Park, and it made its way to the state capitol. People were very calm and peaceful. They were making speeches. They were holding their signs. They were making chants, but very, very peaceful for the first couple of hours. And then we started to see police form this line. That started about halfway through the 5 o'clock hour, and protesters were sort of facing off with the police for quite some time. Like you said, Russ, about an hour, things were quiet. But now this crowd has taken on a new energy, and people are starting to move in a different direction than where we've seen before. So it's unclear what their goal is. Is it to get into the CNN Center? It doesn't appear that way, although they did graffiti the front windows, which we saw a few minutes ago. But now it looks like they're making a renewed attempt to confront, to face off with police in that corner at the original location where they were standing off before.
Right.
But so far they've been unsuccessful in breaching that line of police officers.
Right. And there's no real place for them to go, even if they do on that particular side, because there is an array of police human beings and police vehicles, military and otherwise, just behind that line. It's interesting because this is the area where Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields was having that conversation with a group of the protesters. She made a statement earlier, a 2-minute video posted on the social media pages of the Atlanta Police Department. She said that, you know, the Minneapolis officers who were involved in this, the 4 of them, failed as cops and human beings. This is part of what she had to say. She said, "How disconnected does law enforcement have to be for a man to be suffocated by a cop in broad daylight, knowing the cameras are rolling, with fellow officers standing around watching?" She said, "There's not an answer to this because it's not reasonable in any sense of the word." So she is expressing what 99.99% of the people in that crowd are feeling. And to the extent that she had a chance to share that with them, perhaps that will make some progress toward diffusing this before the sun goes down and things go south.
Yeah. Important to remember that Atlanta's police chief did what she could to try and turn down the temperature of this gathering. And, you know, she was very brave to do so and sort of put herself in a position where things could have gone differently, but it looks like she accomplished what she wanted to accomplish in the immediate term. No telling what could happen as we move further towards sunset, as we get closer to, looks like the time tonight, 8:45 is when the sun will go down. But, you know, so far it's just things change with a crowd, and we've seen that over the last couple of hours. We've seen different things happen. You know, it's sort of like the winds change and all of a sudden people run away, or all of a sudden people run to a new direction, or they start to concentrate around one area. Right now we are looking at the ground shot from our photojournalist Blaine Cummett, and he's been in the park with our Alex Whitler getting images from there on the ground, and now at the corner there, not too many cars. That was something we saw earlier. We saw some cars trying to get through, but the streets look pretty empty now. To be quite honest, people seem to be avoiding that area by choice, or maybe because some streets are blocked off because police know that this is going on now.
Vice President Mike Pence was in Atlanta today. He was in Atlanta last Friday, you may remember, just 7 days ago, supporting Governor Kemp's efforts to reopen the state of Georgia after the White House had initially been somewhat resistant, and the president himself was openly critical. The White House has certainly changed its tune as far as that is concerned. But while the vice president was in town today, he had a chance to talk to Fox 5's Claire Sims in an exclusive interview you saw earlier on Fox 5 News Tonight. And he made reference to Ahmaud Arbery and to George Floyd. He said, "Our prayers are with George Floyd's family. Our prayers are also with the family of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. We have no tolerance for racism in America, no tolerance for violence inspired by racism." And as President Trump said, justice will be served. That from the vice president. But he also said We believe in law and order in this country. We condemn violence against property or persons. We will always stand for the right of Americans to peacefully protest and let their voices be heard. So up until now, I think it's fair to say that Atlanta has set a fine example for the country in terms of how this can be done, both on the part of the protesters and the part of police. Our police chief down there in the middle of the crowd, making sure that they know that they're being heard by the top police officer in the city of Atlanta.
Yeah, seeing some reporting that protesters have been targeting the sign, the large sign in front of the CNN building. The CNN letters have graffiti all over them at this point. They've defaced it with different messages, different symbols. It's unclear why they're targeting CNN. You know, it makes you wonder, do they have a beef with that news organization? Kind of interesting timing, since a CNN correspondent was arrested on the air this morning in Minneapolis reporting on the protests. Something that many of us, I certainly have never seen. Russ, I'm sure you've never seen a reporter arrested on live television. A lot of people have been upset about that today, but really unclear why protesters are defacing the CNN logo there in front of the building.
Apparently some profanity on it, and also the word love, if I'm not mistaken, based on some of the reporting I'm hearing. But yes, the reporter who was arrested this morning by Minneapolis police was broadcasting live at the moment. He had his ID around his neck, an African-American gentleman. Now, the police later tried to explain that, well, they just wanted to confirm that he was who he said he was, which is really, honestly, not a particularly convincing explanation. But there you have it. Atlanta police in the middle of all of this, and people standing around peacefully. A lot of reporters on the scene, obviously, too. A very diverse crowd. No huge sense of urgency. I mean, you know, again, 5 minutes ago, we saw people running over in that direction, looking as though they were going to potentially have a confrontation, and a few people, knuckleheads, were throwing water bottles at the police as if the police are, Atlanta police are part of the problem. But you know, folks have had more than an opportunity to make their voice heard. That's Centennial Olympic Park that we just panned away from, where there was a crowd earlier and there is not now. So if the goal on the part of Atlanta police is to convince folks that, hey, we hear you, we're as disgusted as you are, that's the gulch there underneath, and please go home before this takes a bad turn for everybody, it looks as though potentially there's at least progress in that direction. This is not over by any stretch of the imagination. There's obviously still a crowd, but it's not the size of the crowd we saw an hour ago.
Yeah, it's not. We did see just a couple moments ago, when we had a closer view at some of the police cars parked in front of the CNN Center, that protesters were placing signs on some of the police vehicles. It was unclear what the signs said, or maybe they're just using the cars as a flat surface to write more messages on their signs, but unclear what the goal is there. But that is also going on. Quite a few, now we can see here on the left, looks like people are dancing. You know, our Alex Whitler said that she heard music and she saw people dancing and having kind of a party atmosphere throughout this. So, you know, not necessarily an angry mood with everyone. Some people are sort of having a good time, you know, but you have different groups of people within the larger group, and, you know, like you alluded to earlier, Russ, people have different reasons for being here. Some people are legitimately trying to express their feelings about what happened in Minneapolis, but others are here to make trouble. And that's just a simple fact. And, you know, we saw more of an organized protest demonstration going on in the park, and that dispersed about, it's 7:30 almost, so that dispersed at least half an hour ago. Those people appear to have gone home. So, you know, who knows how many of the people in the original organized protest group are still there. You know, it's kind of a mixed crowd at this point.
Right. And again, more than an hour until sunset, and it'll still be light outside until almost 9 o'clock. So you know that Atlanta police would like to have this cleared up before.
Russ, I see fire and they're burning an American flag.
Yeah. Well.
And it looks like it has something written on it. Stop killing black people is written on the flag, which protesters are burning now in front of the CNN Center. And now we're getting a closer view at just how much graffiti is there on the sign.
Well, it's America. You're allowed to do that. And the police chief has made it clear that there is no curfew on a normal Friday night, and there's nothing normal about the world we're living in at the moment. On a normal Friday night, closing down these roads would be a major inconvenience for business and everybody else. Given that the city is still, to a large extent, shut down, it's less so. And my understanding is that Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields has made it clear to the folks that there is no curfew. As long as they remain peaceful, they can stay out there as long as they like. So the police officers are in place. The protesters are in place. They're certainly not going in the direction of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. As we've showed you several times, there's nowhere to go in that direction. Too many police officers for them to make their way in that way. Let's check back with Alex Whitler. Alex, what are you seeing and what are you hearing? I'm sorry, Suzanne. What did you say to me then? All right. Courtney, you made reference to the fact of that American flag that was being burned that said "Stop killing black people." Apparently, from Sky Fox 5, we are seeing more things being set ablaze, although as I look at this piece of video right now, this is live video from Sky Fox 5, I don't see it, but I'll take your word for it. And when we do see it, we'll show it to you.
I don't see it either. But it almost kind of gave another energy boost to the crowd. After we saw the flag burn, people were sort of dancing and celebrating, you know. Who knows what's the next plan or, you know, the next thing that's going to get the crowd going. But that sort of, you know, added a jolt of energy as we saw people kind of dancing and jumping up and down and celebrating, kind of a celebratory mood after the fire was lit, but it burned out pretty quickly. It's not like any structures are on fire at this point, not that we can see.
Now, this began just before 4 o'clock this afternoon, a 2.5-mile walk from Centennial Olympic Park to the state capitol, hundreds of people involved there. So for some of these folks, they've been doing this for quite a while, you know, more than 3.5 hours. So, but there's no sense from this perspective that this part of the crowd at least looks like it's intending to go anywhere, even though police have asked them to leave and apparently at least offered a verbal threat that they might be arrested if they didn't get out of the street. Sort of conflicting information as far as that's concerned, that the police had asked them to go and had made that threat, and we pointed out that there is a corrections bus there that seems to be ready in case anybody is arrested, and yet the chief apparently told this crowd that there is no curfew. Obviously she'd prefer that they get out of the street, but if that's the worst that happens, that's not much.
Well, I think we can be honest with ourselves. It's 7:30 and people have been here for hours. No telling if they're the same people,
course,
to be fair, that were here when this began. But at any rate, these people who are here now don't appear to be leaving the area, even though they're moving about and sort of changing directions. They're not going home. So at some point, police will have to hold up to what Atlanta's police chief has said, which is she's going to allow people to stay here and protest. But, you know, obviously police have stood there and watched as protesters defaced the CNN property, and they didn't begin to arrest people then. So they're sort of allowing this crowd, giving them some space. But there's no telling how long this will go on because people just don't appear to want to leave.
Well, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has made a point similar to the one that we've been talking about, and that is that the vast majority of the people in this crowd want this to remain peaceful, want this to be a good reflection not only on themselves but on the city of Atlanta and on the movement that they're espousing. That is a movement toward justice. But she acknowledges that there are people in the crowd who are looking for trouble, and her hope is that that this will remained peaceful, and police certainly seem to have it contained at the very least. There's no question that some of the folks in this crowd, probably the ones that are closest to the police, might be a little bit frustrated if it indeed does end peacefully. But again, the expectation and the hope is that they are a very small minority of this large crowd. We're
getting word now from our nation's capital that there are protests going on at the gates of the White House, and so the White House is now on lockdown. That's going on in our nation's capital. Back here, we're seeing people running now back towards the park. Unclear why. Once again, we've seen this happen time and again. Groups of people running away from the location where there's been sort of a standoff with police and protesters. But we did see that happen. Quite a few people running away from the CNN Center location. And it looks like, if we can get a closer look, it looks like at least a couple of people are attempting to break the glass and it looks like they've gotten in. They've broken the glass in the front entrance of the CNN Center in downtown Atlanta. No telling if they'll make it inside or if that's even their intention, but at least one window is now broken. There's shattered glass, and you can see graffiti on some of the other windows there.
Yeah, and lots of things being thrown in the direction of police. We've seen that sporadically throughout the afternoon. It looks to be water bottles for the most part. At one point, one of those orange cones was thrown in the direction of police. Over that line of bicycle police officers that we've seen, there's somebody throwing a bottle from the back of the crowd in a way that they would never be identified unless police want to take a look at this video. Not that that's what police are interested in, but there's a certain cowardice in standing in the back of a crowd and throwing it, something at police officers over the heads of the people in front of you. But there you have it. Again, if that's the worst thing that happens, I think the police will be more than satisfied. There you can see one of the police brass there, presumably in one of those white shirts. And that gentleman there in the yellow is one of the bicycle officers. It's fascinating to watch as this unfolds how many of the folks in the crowd actually do have masks. So as much as they want to make their voices heard, they're making those voices heard through masks that protect them from COVID-19. Now, conversely, there's not a whole lot of social distancing going on, at least right there in the screen that we're looking at. But over toward the crowd, it did, the park that is, it did look as though the crowd was actually making an effort to maintain some distance, because people want to make their voices heard, but they don't necessarily want to get sick in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like police have formed a line and they're keeping protesters from getting any further towards the CNN Center entrance. Now that the glass has broken, it might be their objective to keep people from getting inside the building. And that may have been the new goal, and why we saw people move away from the original location, sort of towards the Mercedes-Benz Center, and then the crowd moved more towards the CNN Center entrance, and you saw them begin to deface the logo. They burned an American flag a few minutes ago. It said "Stop Killing Black People" on it, and they burned that flag in front of the front steps of the CNN Center. Unclear now what the objective is. Is it to get inside that building? Is it just, maybe there is no objective. I mean, to be quite honest, with this many people, it's kind of hard to organize or set a goal. Things just happen. Every few minutes we've seen people do things at different points in time. We've seen people throwing water bottles. We've seen things happen. Obviously, the glass breaking a few minutes ago, and quite a bit of graffiti now on the building. But, one thing I'd like to point out is there are a few less signs. I mean, obviously, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5, 6 signs that people are holding up at this point, but not everyone has one. And more people, people seem to be a little bit more organized. Maybe 2 hours ago when this thing started, there were speeches going on. There were people leading chants in the crowd. At one point, our reporter Alex Whitler saw what looked like a prayer going on. It was organized. It was peaceful. This doesn't really look like that. It looks different. And again, we keep pointing out, because we're not sure who is who and who arrived when, and who may have gone home. But this does look like a different group, at least a different kind of group than what we saw when this first started about 4 hours ago.
No question about it. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has been commenting on this, and while she's trying to discourage these protesters from doing anything destructive, she points out that half of the businesses in Atlanta are owned by women and minorities, which is also the case in the neighborhood in Minneapolis that was in question. Also the case in the neighborhood in Ferguson, Missouri, where you worked for some time there in the city of St. Louis. So the hope is that the protesters, and the vast, obviously, at the risk of being repetitive, after 2 hours, it's hard not to be. Most of the protesters here understand that it's not in the interest of the city of Atlanta, of the community that they care about, for there to be destruction tonight. Now, our hope is that some of these stragglers who are throwing things at police, that they're getting it out of the system with that. If that's the worst that happens, the police will take it and move on.
Yeah. Police Chief Erica Shields getting a lot of praise tonight.
Is that her? Can you tell? She was wearing that white shirt. I'm getting old. I can't see as well as I used to.
I'm not quite sure where you're seeing her. I see one officer in a white shirt there in front of the revolving doors, but I don't see exactly where you're referring to.
Yeah. Where
you see the chief.
No, I'm not saying that I do. I remember seeing her in a white shirt like that, and I can't tell.
Correct.
I can't tell from where I'm far enough away from the television that I can't see who that is. But yeah, she was there for at least a half an hour, surrounded by a scrum of folks, many of them holding signs, expressing their frustration with what happened to George Floyd. Some of them saying, "We don't need cops." And there she was in the middle of them, that black skin is not probable cause, which she would be the first person to say. And here we see things being thrown in the direction of those police officers. Nobody hurt so far, not even really reacting much at all, but that's what it is at the moment.
Yeah, we did see the military-style vehicles pull up and arrive there, and you can't see it anymore because the shot just changed, but those vehicles are still there, and there are police wearing sort of the riot gear that we've seen in the more severe demonstrations going on in places like Minneapolis. But those police, at least not yet, they're not in the location where protesters are now, protesters approaching or at least facing the CNN building entrance. But again, those images can be, they can be a little insightful, you might say, because sometimes what we've seen historically is when the riot police show up, things actually get worse. And so far, Atlanta police have been holding the line with officers in regular, everyday gear. You see one person riding a skateboard here, and, people are just sending the message, look, we're not leaving. You've asked us to leave, and we're not going home. So it's going to end one way or another, but, at least for the time being, they're not leaving.
No question about it. And for some of these folks, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's been almost 4 hours now that some of these folks, and you point out very correctly that we don't know who was around at the very beginning, but this began earlier this afternoon, again, with a march from Centennial Park to the state capitol. And it's hard to know what they're waiting for. And they've made their voices heard to the police. They've had this confrontation on this road leading from Centennial Park to Mercedes-Benz Stadium for several hours now at this very same point. Interesting that they have not decided to go back and maybe try to find another weak point, or at least try to walk in another direction as opposed to standing right there, because again, it's pretty clear that there's enough police manpower that there's no chance that they're going to proceed more in that direction, and yet this is where it sits. This has been the focal point of all of this now for the better part of 3 hours.
Yeah, it's been going on for quite some time, and unclear how much longer it will continue. We're staying on top of it. We're, bringing you these images live as they happen, and doing the best we can to tell the story, even though Russ and I, we are not there, but we are getting a pretty good bird's eye view from up here of what's going on as protesters remain there. We do have a reporter on the ground, our Alex Whitler, and our photojournalist, Blaine Cummett. They've been able to give us a different perspective because they are actually there and they're on the ground. And Alex has talked to protesters at different points. She's seen people running away, and they've said we're running from police. We still have yet to clarify what that means. Why are they running from police? We don't know, but that's happened at least 2 to 3 times in the last hour. We'll just see groups of people start running away from that location.
Yeah, it was odd because you're right. There was like a sprint away from where the police were gathered, and yet the police hadn't moved at all. Now, we can't hear what the police are saying, but it's hard to imagine that they would have said something in that particular instance that would have inspired people to disperse that hadn't before. Otherwise, they'd keep saying it. But to your point, it certainly seems clear that police are now guarding the CNN Center while some folks in the crowd throw water bottles at them. They're trying to make it clear that, okay, somebody broke some glass, that's going to be it. They're not going to have anything happen. The goal, of course, is to not have anything happen here along the lines of what happened in Minneapolis last night.
Yeah.
We've seen a little bit of fire. We saw that American flag burned that said "Stop killing black people," and some excitement among the crowd after that happened. But really nothing of that nature since then, and that was about 10 or 15 minutes ago.
I don't know if you noticed a couple of minutes ago when we had a better view of the front entrance to the CNN Center where the glass has been broken. Police formed a line, and we saw people, police officers in their normal, everyday police uniforms, and we pointed that out. But in the last couple of minutes, I noticed some of the police in riot gear have joined the police officers who are in their everyday uniforms, and they are sort of providing extra backup to keep protesters from getting any closer to that breached entrance at the CNN Center.
Yeah. I was listening to some of the officials speak in Minneapolis this afternoon, and the governor was expressing that, yeah, perhaps they made the bad call, but he said he was waiting to hear from the mayor and the police chief in Minneapolis before taking any action. They ultimately sent in the National Guard, but they didn't do that until after the police station had been overtaken and was already on fire. Because the question was asked, should you have had a larger police presence in place earlier in the afternoon? Now, as you pointed out, Courtney, early in the afternoon yesterday, most of the protests were peaceful. It wasn't until the sun went down that things went very south, really around 10 o'clock at night, when some of the fires started and people were shooting off fireworks, and people who were intent on destruction finally had their way with it. It seems that perhaps Atlanta police are determined, and perhaps have learned a lesson from that, and are determined that a big show of, not force, but a show of manpower might discourage people who would otherwise be inclined to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. You mentioned when it gets dark, things tend to change. That tends to be how these things go, and so you just have to wonder, the closer we get to that time of the sun setting and things getting dark, this crowd does get harder for police to control, and different things can start to take place. But it does look like some of the other windows have been broken a little bit further up. There's that one on the ground level, and then there's one up higher. People continue to throw things. They were throwing water bottles earlier, and it looks like at least one person threw something hard enough to break that window that's well above the reach of someone who's getting to it from the ground. So You know, there are people who are here to make trouble. That's obvious. The question is, how much damage can they do? They've vandalized the sign, they've burned the flag, and they've broken a couple of windows, but beyond that, it's nothing compared to what we've seen in other cities,
right.
Especially Minneapolis, which has just been on fire for the last several nights.
Yeah, the worry is with people throwing things that perhaps a police officer might be injured, and if that were to be the case, that they might feel a need to respond. We certainly hope that that won't be the case. We pray that won't be the case, and there are plenty of police officers there to back each other up. And certainly at this point, the protesters know that. It's interesting, you see the folks in the yellow, they were the ones that were providing the cordon line, and they've now been expelled. So the police officers, some of them in riot gear, have taken their place because it's got to be difficult to stand in a line like that, being the line of defense, keeping the crowd from moving up the street, shoulder to shoulder for 2 hours plus, with angry people facing you down, many of whom perhaps you agree with, at least in terms of their ultimate goal, which is justice for George Floyd, justice for Ahmaud Arbery and his family, and justice for other victims of violence that they didn't deserve. That's ultimately what this is all about, or should be about, not throwing water bottles at police officers who had nothing to do with it. But again, that's been most of what we've seen. I'm sure some people are offended by the burning of the flag, but you know what? That's protest in America. I'm sure that there are people whose loved ones have given their lives for the freedoms that we enjoy, who would say, look, we have a First Amendment to protect unpleasant, uncomfortable speech. And I'm sure plenty of people who are watching tonight were offended by that, and they have every right to be offended by it. But it's all right as Americans to express ourselves in offensive ways. But it's not our right to burn things down, and hopefully that won't happen in Atlanta the way it did in Minneapolis last night.
Absolutely. I think that is the main thing that police want to avoid seeing tonight. They just want to let people have enough space to express themselves in a peaceful way. And, Atlanta's police chief has been very allowing of that to happen. That's been the strategy so far. We'll see if that changes as the night goes on. But, you see people with different signs, "Stop killing us." Looks like there's a depiction on that sign showing sort of a violent situation. But, people have been holding signs up with different messages, Black Lives Matter. There are still people in this crowd who are getting the message across. It just might be in a different way than how it happened a few hours ago when this thing first started and was very organized and orderly. People are going to find different ways to express themselves, and that's what we're seeing happen right now. Quite a bit of graffiti you can see in the background of that shot as we get a wider view in front of the CNN Center. Again, not sure why they've decided to target CNN. It might have nothing to do with the network itself, but that maybe this is just where they are and this is where they've decided to focus their attention. But the CNN Center definitely taking the brunt of any kind of damage, really all the damage that we've seen so far. And just as I'm speaking on that, there's another window a little bit higher up that's just been broken. People look like they're throwing rocks, Russ. It was water bottles earlier, and now it looks like they're throwing rocks.
Well, and obviously that creates a circumstance where somebody could get hurt. One of those signs said "Black Lives Matter every day," and someone who agrees with that wholeheartedly is Police Chief Erica Shields. She said that the answer to this is for police to carry out their duty without regard to color. She said that she was sickened by what she saw on that recording of George Floyd's death at the hands of a police officer in Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin, who's now been charged with third-degree murder and manslaughter. And she was very blunt in saying that she felt like the outcome would have been different for George Floyd had he been white. So clearly there's work to be done. We all agree when it comes to that. And again, just to black, white, brown, people who share a hope for justice. Let's see what we have here. We have some movement with the, looks like police. Are they going after somebody in particular? It's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, running again, just like we've seen at different points throughout today.
I mean,
But
at
it's
some
not clear
point, you
why.
know, if you let people continue to throw rocks, and there are only a few of them, but if you let those people continue to do it, maybe that spark will turn to a flame. So it looks like perhaps they were going after some of the people who were involved in that, who weren't part of the peaceful part of this protest. But I'm looking at it like everybody else,
So
trying to interpret what we're seeing.
yeah, and again, a little bit of activity happening right now. You can see really a better view on the right side of now full screen. As we try to make sense of what's going on there, have a new update from Atlanta Police that just came into our newsroom. Here is what they have to say. We continue to monitor protesters on Centennial Olympic Park Drive near Marietta Street. The demonstration began peacefully with protesters marching from Centennial Olympic Park to the Capitol and back. Upon returning to the Capitol, upon returning to Centennial Olympic Park, the majority of protesters entered into the park while a portion walked south on Centennial Olympic Park Drive, where they surrounded an officer inside his patrol vehicle. Additional officers arrived and began to push protesters back away from the vehicle, which led to a number of scuffles between police and protesters and at least 3 arrests. One officer was pushed to the ground and sustained minor injuries. It does appear pepper spray was utilized several times during the confrontation. Currently, we are attempting to allow the protesters to continue with a peaceful demonstration. Officers have been subject to water bottles, eggs, and other items thrown at them. However, we will remain hopeful that this activity will cease and there will be no need for further arrests or clashes with protesters. Quite a bit of information in that release from Atlanta Police.
Quite a bit of information. It sort of explains why it was so tense in that particular area right there in front of the CNN Center for some time. I mean, if the police officer was pushed to the ground and sustained minor injuries, that's not a small thing, because that's the sort of thing that can escalate into something quite larger. Pepper spray was used. We've seen how that and tear gas and other circumstances has also escalated some of these circumstances. But they're making it clear, as you read, that they're going to allow the protesters to continue with a peaceful demonstration. You understand the frustration. You understand the anger on behalf of the community, on behalf of the family of George Floyd and other families that have experienced unjustified loss, sometimes at the hands of police officers, but not at the hands of these police officers. They didn't do anything. They're out here trying to protect our community and protect the people who are part of this protest as well. You know, perhaps it goes without saying, but these Atlanta officers don't deserve to be hit with bottles, eggs, or anything else. And my guess is that 97% of the people in this crowd would agree with that sentiment. It's just a shame that you know, a few people can make it dicey, and hopefully it doesn't get any more dicey than it's been up until now. If that's, again, I'm repeating myself because we've been doing this for a couple of hours and we're working with limited information. But I think that these police officers have a lot of discipline. They've been well trained. They have a chief who, you know, cares about them and who cares about this particular movement and agrees with it in many respects. I think that they're going to be very patient. They've shown a lot of patience so far.
They have, especially finding out that an officer sustained minor injuries. Now we're seeing people beginning to jump. Now this is escalating in a bad way, as one protester
broke
has
the
just
window
broken
right there on the
windshield on a police car, and someone else now has a gate that is sort of a barrier gate, and he's using that to inflict more damage and try to break all the way through the windshield on that police car.
Yep.
More police cars are now being damaged. And this has taken a serious turn for the worse.
Yeah, this is what some of these people have been waiting for and hoping for, unfortunately. So we'll see what happens, because what it's going to ultimately do is provoke some sort of police response, which is what some of them may want.
It will. And, you know, I want to point something out. One of the protesters just used a skateboard to break in the windshield to that police car. And I don't know if you remember, Russ, a few minutes ago I pointed out that there was someone riding a skateboard. I didn't want to say it out loud because I was, quite frankly, hoping it wouldn't happen. But I've heard reports in other cities that that's been sort of a strategy, is to ride in on a skateboard and use that skateboard to break glass and to break windows on police cars. So now we're seeing it happen, just like what we've seen in other cities. Someone's actually using a guitar to cause damage, or causing more damage to the musical instrument than the car. But, you know, people are just using everything and anything just to try to create as much damage as they possibly can on these police cars.
Right.
Kind of take out all their frustration on them.
Well, if that blows off the steam and the police cars end up being damaged and police officers are okay, the police vehicles can be replaced. It's interesting, you know, we've been watching this now together and talking about it together for quite some time. And what changed, other than the fact that enough time has passed and some people in the crowd had not gotten the confrontation that they were hoping for, and are looking to try to escalate.
Yeah.
And it puts police in a very, very difficult circumstance, because their job is to control the crowd and try to end this in a way where the folks who walk away from this can feel like they have respect for themselves and the city and not be arrested.
We are now seeing a very physical confrontation between police and protesters as they physically move this line back.
Right.
And it looks like they've taken at least one person into custody. I would assume many more to follow, because now that this has gotten so violent,
Right.
police are going to start making more arrests.
Well,
they have no other
really
choice.
had no choice. I mean, the folks who escalated this sort of put the police in a circumstance where it was inevitable, and it clearly that's the confrontation that some of these folks wanted.
Yeah, people, you know, the crowd is becoming more mixed with the police officers. It's becoming harder to tell who's a protester and who's police now. But as we get closer, we can see very clearly police now making another arrest there on the left side of your screen. And physically, very physically now, police moving protesters back towards Centennial Olympic Park and away from the CNN Center where they've been gathered. But there are quite a few more behind that initial line there.
Right. Well, perhaps if police are able to arrest the ones who want to be arrested, the ones who are really looking for a fight, and get them arrested and out of this crowd, perhaps the rest of the crowd might be willing to go home and say, all right, some folks got arrested, martyrs for the cause, if that's the way they want to look at it, and the rest of us have had our point. But yes, this is as confrontational as it has been since all this began 4 hours ago.
Yeah, disappointing to see things turn out this way, because it was so peaceful and so orderly when the protest began in the park and went to the Capitol. You know, we went for hours, 3 hours at least,
Right.
with nothing like this. And now you see people actively getting arrested. Police have the zip ties out.
Right.
You know, they're taking people into custody.
Well, if you throw a rock at a police officer, that's a crime, and they let them get away with it for a while, for a good long while, actually. And perhaps the calculation, and we'll have a chance to do a post-mortem with the mayor and the police chief, but perhaps the feeling was, look, there are only a few people in this crowd who are itching for a fight. If we get them out of here, perhaps that's the best way to resolve this without it getting worse. And honestly, it seems like they're making some arrests, but beyond that, it almost seems as though they've taken a little bit more control.
Yeah, you know, the crowd sort of had to disperse a little bit, because some people, as you said, just don't want to get arrested. They'll let someone else get arrested, but they don't, frankly, want to go to jail themselves. So the crowd, at least for the time being, has sort of scattered a little bit instead of being so concentrated in that one area. And quite a few police officers are now on the scene. So police have been able to maintain the upper hand, even though they were greatly outnumbered a few hours ago. Little by little, more officers have shown up, more backup has arrived, and they've been able to hold these protesters off from getting any further past the CNN Center away from the park. Now that they're making arrests, it looks like even more people have cleared away from the entrance to the CNN Center. So they're getting some kind of a handle on the situation, but it's still a little bit chaotic, as you can see.
We are now about 4 hours and 10 minutes into this protest, which began at Centennial Park, went to the state capitol, came back in this direction, and as Courtney told us earlier in the statement from the city, there was a confrontation earlier during which an Atlanta police officer was injured. Minor injuries, it was described by the Atlanta Police Department, but injuries nonetheless. And there were some arrests at that point, and now we're seeing more arrests. Interestingly, this is probably apropos of nothing, but it seems to me that the majority of the people that I've seen being arrested are white. I'm not sure whether that matters one bit or not, but that's just sort of an observation as I see the people being hauled away by Atlanta police.
Yeah, and it has been kind of a mixed crowd. It's not necessarily all black protesters who were there. And now we're getting a look at the extent of the damage to these police cars. 1, 2, 3, 4 cars that I can see, at least in this camera view, have their windshields broken. A 5th, a 6th, a 7th car, an 8th and a 9th car. 9 of the police cars parked in front of the CNN Center have their windshields broken at least partially in. And we saw it happen just a few minutes ago when protesters got on the roofs, they got on the hoods of those cars, and they used whatever they could find, a skateboard, a metal barrier, even a guitar, using those items to break the windshields on those cars.
Right, and that inspired police to take some pretty quick action. I mean, watching them, yeah, that's some significant damage. People standing on top of them with their arms raised as though they'd accomplished something significant. And police decided they'd had enough and moved forward from that position in front of the CNN Center back toward Centennial Olympic Park. And that bus that pulled up a couple of hours ago that you pointed out at the time, Courtney, we were hoping it wouldn't have to get used, and now it's going to be used. That's the bus that's going to take some people off to jail.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It didn't have to be this way. I mean, they got their message across. They protested. They were allowed to even get a little bit rowdy for a few different moments there, and police allowed them a lot of leeway to do that. Police Chief Erica Shields is being widely celebrated on social media right now. A lot of people saying that she handled this so well and allowed people, even physically walked into the crowd and heard from them herself why they were there, what their gripe was, what they had to say. People were given every opportunity to get their message across. They were allowed to protest, and they had every right to be upset. But they did not have a right to take things in the direction that they have clearly gone in now with the damage to the CNN Center and to the police vehicles there in front of it. I am not making an evaluation of whether that was right or wrong, but clearly it is illegal and it is warranting arrests to happen, which is what we've seen.
No, I think that's very well put. And now we see the crowd closer to Centennial Olympic Park, but it's a smaller crowd. Some have been arrested. Others know that they will be arrested if that's what's necessary. And look at that police presence there on the downtown connector. This is at 10th near Georgia Tech. We're looking at an area very near the varsity. So Georgia Tech there on the left, Bobby Dodd Stadium. That's 10th Street right there. And some people have made it onto the interstate. There was some concern that perhaps that might happen in various protests in the past. That has been a destination to try to disrupt things as much as possible. Just imagine what this would have been like on a typical Friday night in the city of Atlanta, even at this hour, at 8 o'clock. And of course there's going to be traffic and there's going to be disruption. But on a typical Friday night, this would really have been quite something. Less so during these pandemic times, but looks like there are probably 3-4 dozen people out on the street and almost that many police cars, Courtney.
Yeah, I can't quite tell which direction they are on the downtown connector. I don't know if you
They're on
can,
the
Russ.
northbound side.
Okay,
they're
so
on the northbound side.
yeah, it looks like they're blocking a good amount of the traffic on the northbound side of the downtown connector right now. It looks like at least one lane is kind of squeezing through, and it looks like the police cars are positioned to allow for that to happen. But you're completely right. To the credit of the fact that we've been at home, many people are not working in their offices right now due to the pandemic. This would have been a much different traffic situation on a typical Friday night here in Atlanta, downtown connector being one of the most congested, typically, areas in our city for commuting. So
yeah, Georgia Tech there on the other side. It looks like these people are right next to the varsity, actually, very, very close to the varsity. And the William Street exit there on the other side going southbound. But this is people that have just come through downtown, past Cortlandt Street, and approaching Midtown, and the northbound lanes are completely blocked as police cars, dozens of them. All right, well, now we're going to go back to the CNN Center because I'm being told you can see some smoke there, and these are police cars on fire, we're told. Police cars on fire. The first significant fire that we've seen in the more than 4 hours of this. It's 8:07, 8:06 in 10 seconds. And we're witnessing, unfortunately, the first fire in the city of Atlanta of real consequence, aside from the burning of the American flag. So Sky Fox 5 is going to head back in that direction.
Okay, yeah, it's definitely taken a turn, Russ. Things have gotten a lot more contentious. They've gotten more violent as we've seen police cars on fire. That is not something we have seen so far. We're now in almost our fourth hour of coverage here. And we haven't seen anything on fire for that matter, with the exception of the American flag for that one moment. This is video you're looking at from kind of how this began to get a little bit more violent. We saw police face off with protesters at different points in Centennial Olympic Park. We saw them move in front of the CNN Center, but it wasn't until about an hour ago when we saw protesters begin to significantly damage property. First, the CNN Center, they broke the window there, and now this.
Yeah, this is some of the police cars on fire in front of the CNN Center. It looked like police had this under control. They had pushed the crowd back, had made some arrests, had put some of those folks on the bus that they had pulled up in the event that arrests were necessary. Not clear how this fire started. It looks like it's one vehicle, but it's really hard to tell. Someone with his hand up there, apparently pleased with the outcome with respect to this police car. And some people applauding on the other side, you can see, as police officers are on the scene. Those in the yellow vests with the masks on, those are police officers who had been mounted on bicycles who were stopping the crowd from moving up the street past the CNN Center. There you can see the broken windshield, broken windows of several Atlanta police cars. So that kind of property destruction, of course, is illegal, but not the sort of thing the police would be as upset about as they are about this. You know, a fire set, because this is the sort of thing that might have a tendency to sort of escalate the emotion in the crowd, it would seem. Emotion
and property damage. You burn a police car, what is next? And we've seen the images out of Minneapolis. We've seen a Napa auto parts store get burned. We've seen a Target store get completely vandalized and looted until there was barely any merchandise left in the entire store. By nature of the protesters being in downtown Atlanta, there aren't the types of smaller businesses and stores that we saw in downtown Minneapolis. Not to make a comparison, because again, that is a much more dramatic situation than having just one or two cop cars on fire now in downtown Atlanta. But just to point out that once things start to get set on fire, what's next? You know, it's a sad turn of events because things again have been so peaceful for the first few hours of it.
Yeah, it's very sad. The African-American police officer to the left, who we panned away from, with the mask over his face was just shaking his head, because if you could read his mind, I think he was saying the same thing that you said. It's sad. It's just not what the police chief was hoping for. She went down, stood in the middle of this crowd, and implored them and said, "Look, I'm with you. This is an injustice that we all witnessed as a nation. It's not right. There's no rational explanation for it, for what Officer Derek Chaffin did, or the 3 officers who stood by and watched him do it for 8 minutes and 43 seconds. There's no way to explain that away," says the police chief. She says she was sickened by it. I'm sure she's disappointed by seeing this as well.
Yeah, it is disappointing. Just to remind our viewers, if you're just joining us, if you're just tuning into our coverage, we are in extended coverage right now. We've been on the air for several hours covering demonstrations taking place in downtown Atlanta, as we have seen in other cities across the country, as people are expressing outrage over the death of an unarmed black man in police custody in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It happened on Monday, but today, 4 days after the incident, the officer, one of 4 officers, but the officer who held his knee down on the neck of George Floyd, the man who died, was charged today with 3rd-degree murder and manslaughter. This is clearly not enough for the protesters who are taking to the streets now, destroying property, burning police vehicles in our city, a city that has nothing to do with what happened in Minneapolis, but people clearly feeling very real outrage and displeasure with what has taken place, calling out what they say is police brutality, is a different system of justice in this country for black men and everybody else. And so that is what we are seeing here in Atlanta.
Yeah, and Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields acknowledged as much in a conversation with Fox 5's More Stiggs today, saying that she believed that George Floyd would be alive if he were white. She is preparing to speak at the Atlanta Police Headquarters. We're going to go there when that happens. Again, it's 8:11 and 48 seconds on a Friday night, and we witnessed a major fire on a police car. And yet, strangely, as that continues to burn, there's not a huge amount of urgency on the faces of these police officers. I mean, the car is gone, obviously. They don't care about the car. What they care about is what happens now. And perhaps the hope is, because they're pretty still and they're watching, perhaps the hope is that this will let off some steam, that some people in this crowd weren't going to be satisfied until something went up in flames. And if it's a police car that goes up in flames and that's it, well, okay. We've seen a lot worse, and we saw a lot worse last night when an entire police station went up in flames in Minneapolis, and some private property that belonged to African Americans in that African American community. So,
yeah.
So the hope is that that this will be it.
Yeah, we're getting a different view now of that police car. It looks like it's at least one police car. It looks to be only one, but it's hard to tell because there's thick black smoke rising from it,
right,
and kind of obscuring the view. But we're seeing more of a bird's eye view now of what's taking place downtown. And people are kind of forming a wide arc around, because a car fire isn't necessarily something you want to stand right in front of. But so that is sort of spreading people out away from that car. But again, unclear what the goal is now that things have turned more chaotic. And to remind you, protesters are gathered on the downtown connector, at least they were as of about 5 minutes ago, on the downtown connector, blocking traffic on the northbound lanes. And there was a huge police presence there trying to hold protesters off. So now police efforts are sort of divided between these different areas where protesters are causing trouble.
Well, it's all hands on deck for Atlanta Police. They're all working now. A lot of them here on this scene at Centennial Olympic Park and the CNN Center. They've had a massive show of force for several hours now. We can see firefighters arriving on the scene to put this fire out and to be on the scene in case anything else happens. We saw last night in Minneapolis that there was no way for the fire department to get in there because there was such a large crowd, and things got out of hand before there was any way for them to be in place. But Atlanta police have control of Centennial Olympic Drive there, the road that goes from the park up to Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They've pushed the protesters back toward the park, and that's where this is happening, near that intersection there closest to the park. And now firefighters will make short work of this. That was gone anyway. Keep it from spreading, keep anybody else from getting hurt by that fire, and hope that perhaps that will be it. But Courtney also mentioned the protesters on the downtown connector. That was just south of 10th Street there, just south of where the Varsity is, after the curve coming through past Cortlandt Street. The entire northbound lanes closed with, it looked like, at least 2 or 3 dozen Atlanta police cars with their lights blaring, covering the interstate. Almost as many police cars and police officers as there were protesters on the street, but it doesn't take very many to shut down an interstate, obviously.
Yeah, it doesn't, but it takes a lot of police cars and a lot of police effort to keep those protesters from doing whatever they want on the interstate. And, you know, at some point they hope to probably get them off so that traffic can open up. As you said earlier, Russ, it's a good thing. Well, I guess it's insensitive to say it's a good thing that we're in the midst of a pandemic, but it is rather advantageous that this is not a typical Friday night with the traffic situation that would be going on not only on the downtown connector, but in downtown where protesters are gathered, because most people are at home still as we socially distance. Even though Georgia is in the early stages of its reopening in this pandemic, people have been mostly at home and mostly off the streets, which is probably helping in the police response to this, but still not an easy situation to contain. And it does look like firefighters who arrived in the last couple of minutes have gotten a handle on that car fire. It looks like mostly smoke now that's left over, but there are still some small flames, but it looks like they've gotten it at least mostly extinguished.
No, and now it doesn't look a whole lot different than it did a couple of hours ago, which is largely to the credit of Atlanta police for having enough people there to convince this crowd that while they could get away with something, they're not going to get away with everything. They didn't get into the CNN Center. There's been some destruction there on the scene, which perhaps will satisfy some in the crowd who felt as though there had to be some retribution. The retribution belongs in the direction of Minneapolis, not in the direction of Atlanta police, but there you have it. People are justifiably angry, as you point out, justifiably outraged and looking for an outlet. And that police car has been the largest outlet so far in these 4.5 hours. We are going to hear from Atlanta's police chief relatively soon about this. Perhaps she will explain her thoughts in terms of how they've allocated manpower from the police department down here to Centennial Olympic Park. The challenge that they're facing as nightfall approaches here within sunset within the next half an hour or so, when hopefully hopefully this crowd will have dissipated by that time, because the nighttime could prove more difficult for police. It's harder to see what's going on.
Yeah, one would hope people would say enough is enough and we've made our point. And we made it with a little bit of property damage, so let's go home. But it's not necessarily going to happen. There's no guarantee that will happen. We're about half an hour away from sunset, and as the night goes on, things could turn out in a number of different ways. But as we've seen, protesters, at least this group of protesters, have not made any indication that they'd like to go home. So we continue on now as it's 8:18 in the evening. We've been on the air here since 4:30, and we've been continuously covering this situation since about 5:30. So we have been on the air with this for 3 hours, and things have taken more of a violent turn in about the last 20 to 30 minutes. Actually, let me correct that. Things took a turn about an hour ago when protesters started to break the windows at the CNN Center, throwing rocks, throwing different items, and breaking into the door there.
It looks
now
like we got
we're seeing
another
more
fire
flames.
burning, yeah. Let's take a look at what's happening there. Again, we saw Atlanta Fire Department is on the scene But in that very same area where we saw one police car on fire, it appeared that perhaps there was another. And the response from the crowd there, from some of them at least, is not only to hold up their protest signs, but to hold up their phones, perhaps broadcasting this on their own social media channels, perhaps recording it for their own posterity. But they were presumably not reading what the mayor of Atlanta had to say, posted on Twitter earlier this afternoon. When lives and the conscience of this nation are at peril, we as a people are expected to exercise our constitutional rights to peacefully assemble and have our voices heard. Atlanta embodies these values, and I encourage all who exercise these rights to remember Atlanta's legacy of peaceful protest leading to progress. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms earlier today. So some in the crowd, not many, but some, are determined that this not be as peaceful as it might have been, as peaceful as the police chief was hoping it would be when she went down and stood in the middle of that crowd. But whatever that fire was, it didn't last very long. Again, police on the scene and firefighters too, and good on them.
Yeah, they've gotten this under control to a certain extent, if you can call it control, but it hasn't escalated into an all-out riot. Let me not make that judgment. I mean, things have burned, so call it a riot if you will, but things could certainly be worse, and they have not gotten that much worse as far as we have seen after the police car was burned. But police doing their best just to hold off the protesters and maybe regain some ground, because now it looks like they've gotten them a little bit further away from the entrance to the CNN Center, which was such a point of focus for the protesters maybe 30 minutes ago. And so now they've gotten them away from those windows. Again, they breached the window on the ground level, so presumably someone could have entered the building and started doing damage inside the CNN Center building. But that hasn't happened as far as we've seen, because police formed a hard line and they got protesters away from that area. And now it looks like people are moving away. You see police in riot gear now. They've got those shields on their faces. They are actively moving people back, away, and they're doing it in quite a physical way. So this is becoming a little bit more hands-on than what we've seen.
Yeah, it is. And all of it being recorded from 100 different perspectives, people holding up their phones, broadcasting it. Of course, it was a recording that demonstrated to us the injustice, the crime that happened to George Floyd. So there are good things about the fact that people have recordings in public and can hold folks to account. On the other hand, it does occur that perhaps the desire to be in the middle of all this and record it and be a part of something dramatic may also be inspiring people to do things that perhaps they shouldn't. Whatever. That's the sort of social media world that we're living in at this moment. But you can see police moving in this direction, some water being thrown in their direction, not for the first time today. Something else now they're being thrown. And the police have been extraordinarily patient as far as that minor kind of thing is concerned, really for the last several hours. When they started to move folks down from the CNN Center, from that sign you can see in the background, that had to do with some things being thrown that were actually perhaps threatening to police, breaking windows with rocks, and then of course breaking the windshields of some of those police vehicles by actually climbing on top of them. That has led back to this intersection where we're looking at now. Our photojournalist Blaine Cummett taking us right up to the front of this. His back to the right is where Centennial Olympic Park is. To the right is the CNN Center, as you can see. So if you were to turn around to the right, you would see Centennial Olympic Park. An hour ago, well, 20 minutes ago, this entire crowd was up closer to that sign. And some of them, not a lot, but some of them, you can see police now getting more aggressive, trying to claim some ground. Unclear what the end game is here now. Perhaps trying to open that intersection. I'm not sure, Courtney.
Yeah, not clear what the goal is. What my hope is in the immediate term is that our crew, if they're listening, just know that we want you guys to be safe. So if things start to take a turn, we will readjust. Please do not put yourselves in the middle of the fray to get a good shot for us. We'll be fine. We want you guys to be safe. But to point out what's going on, police in riot gear have shields, and they're using those shields to move protesters back physically. And we've seen people pushing back. They said, no, we're not going home. We're not leaving. And so now they're facing off with police. And you see someone holding a sign there, Justice for Breonna Taylor. That is another situation that has caused quite a bit of tension across the country this week. People upset. This happened in Louisville, situation there. She was shot and killed by police there, and people have been protesting her death as well. In fact, 7 people were shot at a protest in Louisville just yesterday. In that situation, but that's separate from the primary focus of why many people have gathered downtown here in Atlanta today. They're protesting the death of George Floyd by the hands of Minneapolis police, one of whom has been charged with murder. And so you see there a military-style police vehicle and one officer holding something that is not clear to me, but it looks like it might be, if I can just speculate, maybe rubber bullets. Russ, I don't know if you have a better view.
No, I don't know either. I was wondering the same thing, but he's clearly in riot gear and intending to protect himself, and it's a dramatic show of force. There's no two ways about it. And as you point out, people don't want to move, and they are broadcasting to the world, feeling as though they're doing a service in some of the same way that we are, and telling their story as they're up close and personal to what's happening in this intersection. And again, now here we're at 8:26 on this Friday night, and you can see the sun is starting to set there behind Mercedes-Benz Stadium, behind the CNN Center, and it won't be too long. An hour from now, it's going to be dark in this intersection. The lights will be on, obviously, but the equation will be different at that point. And you can see this police officer now protecting himself with that metal plate from any potential of things being thrown at him, because we've seen a lot of that over the course of the last several hours. Of course, they don't want to do anything to hurt anybody and don't want to be hurt themselves.
Okay, we're standing by, Russ. I'm hearing word that we will be hearing from Atlanta Police Chief Erica Shields and Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. They will be addressing the media at Atlanta Police Headquarters in the next few minutes. So we're standing by to hear from them. Clearly, a lot of people would like to hear what they have to say, their leadership in this situation. We have heard from them at different points, releasing statements and whatnot, but this will be the first official briefing that they will give. And maybe we can gain some insight into what the strategy is now moving forward. We heard from Atlanta's police chief that she was allowing protesters space to demonstrate and giving them quite a bit of leeway in that regard, even allowing them to make minor property damage and not really go into the crowd and physically stop them from doing that. But now that things have taken a more violent turn, we will anticipate to hear from her, particularly in what the police strategy is going forward into the night as the sun begins to set.
Yeah, Police Chief Erica Shields has made it clear that from the standpoint of the injustice that was committed to George Floyd, she's all with these people. She came down, it's been a couple of hours now, without any kind of protection, no vest of any kind. She came down in her uniform with her white shirt on, stood in the middle of that crowd. She's a diminutive woman, and listened to them and said what she wanted to say. And most of what she wanted to say was that there was no curfew. The city's more or less shut down anyway. As long as you're peaceful, you can have this part of the city and say what you want to say for as long as you want to say it. No curfew. And she's made it clear that she feels like what happened in Minneapolis was sickening, that the responsibility of the police, and she's the leader of the police department in Atlanta, is to carry out their duty without regard to color, period, end of story. And a lot of those Atlanta police officers who are arrayed there are African American themselves. Obviously, that goes without saying. And most of those police officers, black and white, I'm sure agree with the protesters based on what we saw on that 8-minute 43-second video of the death of George Floyd, that what happened there was an unreasonable injustice. No justification whatsoever, no possible justification for treating a human being that way.
That's absolutely the sentiment that's been shared by many people from all walks of life in this country. Just outrage, and that is a view that has been shared. Now, the decision of what to do with that anger, that has been different. We've seen everything from peaceful protests, many peaceful protests across the country, to quite a bit of violence, and people are expressing their anger and their frustration in different ways, and some of those ways are illegal and not acceptable by police. And now what you're looking at is a line of police officers with more riot gear on Marietta Street, and they are forming a line, holding that line. It looks like anytime the protesters move back, police move forward, and they don't want to give up any more ground. So they're holding them off, and they're moving them further towards the park, towards Centennial Olympic Park, and away from the CNN Center, which is where they were before. Possibly the goal is to get them into the park where they can't do as much damage. But as we've seen, there were several cars parked in front of the CNN Center. They set fire to one of those police vehicles. The windows were broken at the CNN Center. Graffiti was done all over the CNN, iconic red letters, that sign that's in front of that building. Protesters putting profanity on it, putting different messages, and at one point burning an American flag that said, "Stop killing black people," across the front. Someone had written on it. So different acts of property destruction are what we have seen here playing out for at least the last hour and a half in a protest that started peacefully at about 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, they certainly have made progress in controlling this crowd, as you say, pushing the crowd down toward Centennial Olympic Park. For an hour and a half or 2 hours, we saw bicycle officers in their yellow vests making a line much like this. And now it looks like some people are intent on being arrested, and the police are going to accommodate them, and not for the first time. When that fire was set and when people were stomping on those police cars and breaking the windshields, there were several arrests. Hard to say precisely how many, but I feel like I saw at least 6, 7, or 8 arrests, and now some more being made right now. Some people perhaps feel it's their duty to the cause to be arrested, and at some point, if they threaten police or charge the line, they're going to have their wish granted, and that person is on looks like her way to that corrections bus that's been waiting there. A big show of force. You can see one of those officers standing on top of that military style vehicle, and there's that Atlanta police cruiser that went up in flames. Firefighters came on the scene. There's the bus, Atlanta Corrections. It's not going anywhere yet because it's not full, and they feel like perhaps they're going to have a need for more space, that they might have some more customers before this is over.
Yeah, quite a bit of damage done. I mean, the car has been burned completely. Yeah, as you can see, and kind of hard to believe it was burned that severely right next to this very large bus that's taking people away, although it may have moved because it was parked further back before, so I'd correct myself, it did move further down the street. And they've moved the police vehicles as well. Right. The military style vehicles have been moved as well further down, just kind of holding that line, getting people further and further away from their initial location.
Looks to me like some of the windows there at McCormick's in the far corner have also been broken. People trying to get off some steam. There was a lot of pent-up anger, and a lot of it justified, obviously. And there's another bottle being thrown in the direction of police. And it looks like I can't tell, the people who have their hands up, are they recording it? It's hard to know what they're doing. Perhaps some chanting going on. It's a shame we can't hear precisely what's being said. But this crowd is about the same size as we saw further up the street. But there was a whole other crowd that had been in Centennial Olympic Park about this same size. So just a guess, Courtney, but it looks to me like there are about half as many people there now as there were perhaps a couple of hours ago.
Yeah, the crowd has thinned out a little bit. It has thinned out significantly, you could say, when you compare it to the size of the crowd when we began, and this was a very peaceful and organized protest that started in the park at Centennial Olympic Park and traveled to the state capitol initially. That was a very large crowd. Many more people were gathered and they stayed peaceful and had no problems. But then what we saw is that organized group remained in the park and they made speeches, they said prayers, they said chants, completely peaceful organization in the park. And then just down the street, there began to form a group of people that was separate from that other group right in front of the CNN Center and actually began to start causing more problems and sort of evolved into what we are seeing now. But you're right, it is a fewer number of people, and although the crowd is smaller, they are just as stubborn to leave, because even though they've been pushed back, they are making no motion to get out of the area altogether. And we've just seen the amount of police officers here continue to grow and grow over the last few hours. And at one point, it was mainly bicycle officers, if you remember. They were holding up their bikes in a barrier and holding the protesters off that way. At one point, they were linking arms, and for at least the first couple of hours, this police response was done by officers in their everyday uniforms. It wasn't until the last couple of hours that we began to see our first officers in riot gear with the military-style vehicles begin to arrive, and now we're at the point now where it's mainly officers in riot gear because of the necessity of that type of equipment to keep officers safe while they try to bring some order to this unruly gathering.
No, it's really well put, and perhaps, one reason for that is fear that perhaps things might get worse as the sun goes down, as darkness approaches. They clearly seem to have wanted to move the crowd into a circumstance where they could do less property damage if they're inclined to, because they've come down the street more toward the park. They have no access now to the CNN Center. You can see the police officers, that there's the Hudson Grill, but to the right, all the way across the street, they have the entire road blocked over there, so that minimizing damage that might incite more damage would seem to be what they have in mind. Now, as we've been pointing out, Mayor Bottoms and Chief Shields are going to address the media at Public Safety Headquarters about these demonstrations. Boy, wouldn't it be wonderful if somehow some of these protesters tuned into that on their phones, or if we could broadcast it somehow in some way so that there could actually be a conversation akin to the conversation that Chief Shields had actually on the ground there a couple of hours ago.
Good point. It's communication is everything, and we've seen the energy of this crowd die down when they feel that their voices were heard. But again, it's just so hard to tell who is who and who maybe wasn't there when Chief Shields was in the crowd communicating so well with people and kind of calming down tensions. There could be people here, like you said earlier, who just want to cause trouble, and they're determined to make that happen one way or another. So that is the situation. But it will be interesting to hear from Chief Shields what her feelings are on how this has progressed, and if there is going to be any change in the strategy of trying to tamp this down. And we should mention, just because they get out of this situation tonight, maybe people go home and we don't see any more property damage. Great, but what happens tomorrow, and what happens the night after that? We're going into the weekend. Things are going to be fairly mild in terms of the weather. It's a clear weekend. We're not going to have rain like we've had all this week. Low humidity, in fact, and mild temperatures. So, what's to say that there couldn't be another violent gathering or, another unruly crowd that develops tomorrow night and the night after. So expect to hear some kind of a warning from the mayor maybe just a plea or a kind request to people that, hey, I get it. I get why you're frustrated. You have every right to be upset. But please, please do not do this in our city, and try to find a peaceful way to voice your discontent.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. Although I will say over the last couple of days, I have heard prominent African-American commentators speak on this issue who say, look, I talk to folks and they don't want to hear it anymore. They say, look, we've been patient, but this is not a new problem, and it continues to happen all over the country in various venues, sometimes recorded, sometimes not, and we've had it up to here, not taking it anymore. And you can understand that frustration as well. But again, at the risk of being repetitive, the police officers on the other side of this line, they're human beings too. They've seen that video too. I'm sure that they are embarrassed that someone who professes to be a police officer would conduct themselves in that way. It makes all police officers look bad. It makes their job more dangerous than it ought to be. So they're victims in all this too. They're out there trying to do their job to keep the protesters safe, to keep the city safe, to protect property. Although property's obviously less important than the lives of everybody who's involved in all of this. But clearly some of the people in this crowd, and certainly in Minneapolis last night and the night before, don't want to hear it. But there it is, the sun about to go down. It's 8:41, sunset just a couple of minutes away, and it's going to be dark in downtown Atlanta, and that will change the dynamic. There's no two ways about it. But the police chief and the mayor are going to ask for calm. They're going to implore people to have respect for the legacy of this city, the city too busy to hate, or supposed to be. That's what we strive for. The legacy of peaceful protest, the nonviolence that Dr. Martin Luther King spoke about so eloquently, that his family continues to try to propagate. I mean, it's a long process, and it's been too long for some of these protesters, and who can blame them? But burning a police car isn't going to change anything in a positive direction either. I think we can all agree on that in a rational moment. Unfortunately, at the moment, a lot of folks are operating on emotion, and it's genuine emotion. There's no two ways about that.
Yeah, that's very well said, Russ. I've heard it repeated in the last few days, the quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., "Violence is the language of the unheard." And people feel this is their way of expressing their distaste about what continues to happen, in their view, in this country. And enough is enough, is what they're saying. And, we are not the only city that is unrelated completely to what happened in Minneapolis, but clearly a large number of people. This is not 5 people, it's not 10 people, it's hundreds of people. And over 1,000 people at one point, when this was a peaceful protest, were expressing anger and outrage at what happened in Minneapolis. So that is the situation here. As we get closer to the sun setting and us getting under cover of night, police continue to hold protesters back at the corner of Marietta Road and Centennial Olympic Parkway. In front of the CNN Center, you have the State Farm Arena and the Centennial Olympic Park there behind. This has now turned into an ebb and flow situation where we've seen moments where the crowd has become more agitated and they burned that police car you can see there. It's been charred. They vandalized the front entrance of the CNN Center at one point, breaking windows and doing quite a bit of graffiti. And now they are being held off as police hold their position at the intersection. And the group has not been able to make it any further down past where police are. And you can see the extent of all the police vehicles going back down Marietta Road. Sorry, Russ, correct me. Is that Centennial Olympic Parkway?
Yeah, that's Centennial Olympic Parkway, right.
Yeah, and so
Marietta is the one that goes in front of where you see CNN Center there.
You're right. Yep. But police have sort of held that line, and all of those cars behind just kind of give you an idea of how many law enforcement personnel are responding to this. It goes back quite a ways.
Right. No, I think that they have decided that what happened in Minneapolis last night is not going to happen in Atlanta tonight. They are not going to be caught on their back foot. They are going to get enough folks out there to convince this crowd, you can say what you want to say. We are going to listen to what you want to say. You can throw bottles at us, but you are not going to burn stuff down. My understanding is now from our reporting, our producer tells me that we've learned that the State Patrol SWAT team is on the scene. And the hope, obviously, is that they will not have to go into action. It's all this is just in case. But you pointed out, Courtney, there's that corrections office, there's that corrections bus right there with the lights flashing at the top left of our screen. When we widened out, Skyfox 5 showed Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and there's another one that's waiting up there also with lights flashing just in case they need to make that many arrests. But Chief Shields has made it clear that that's not their intent. They will let these people gather as long as they gather peacefully. They can stay there all night if they want. If the police have to stay in that cordon until 5 o'clock in the morning till the last person goes home and nobody gets hurt, I think they will have considered this a success. But we'll hear from the chief and the mayor before long and hear what they have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, don't let it be said that people were not given the opportunity to demonstrate and do it in a way that bordered on peaceful at one point, but was not entirely peaceful. You know, obviously, for the majority of the time so far, it was peaceful and it was a success.
Right.
But people were given the opportunity to express themselves, and now it's just a waiting game. What's going to happen next? As police are lined up there, protesters have now taken over the intersection, and many of them are not leaving. If anything, it looks like some people are walking towards the intersection and joining the crowd that's there.
And there's really not much they can do there other than protest peacefully. Now we see some people running back toward the park. Obviously, from our vantage point, it's unclear why. It doesn't seem like there were any aggressive moves that we can tell from police in their direction. But it would seem, and we'll hear from the chief soon, but it would seem that if it stays where it is, that's a pretty good place for it to be, because there's not much that they can do to the park. They've got them surrounded, and it doesn't look as though the crowd is intent to move. So as long as it stays in one place, that could be a good thing.
And let me just make clear, because I'm looking now at some of the commentary on social media, and I want to make it very clear that we are not condoning, we at Fox 5, us as journalists, we're not opining on what's happening here. We're just narrating for you what's going on, and we're providing context and comparing to what's going on in other cities. So when you hear us say that one police car was burned, a few windows were broken, and some graffiti was done, that is by no means minimizing what happened. It is not condoning the violence or the property damage. We are not expressing our opinions. That is not what we do as journalists. We are only simply providing you some context, because remember, this is not anything that took place within the Atlanta Police Department. That's not what protesters here are complaining about. They are here to express their discontent with what happened in Minneapolis, when a man was killed by police when he was in custody in that state. So people here are expressing their discontent, and yes, they have damaged property, but it has by no means been on the level of what we saw in Minneapolis, where that happened, where they've burned down entire buildings. They burned down an auto parts store. They vandalized a Target and looted almost everything inside. So I just wanted to make that clear, Russ, if you don't mind. No, please. It's perspective. And I guess, you know, we've been out here for now 3 hours almost, and I probably have veered into expressing an opinion during the course of those 3 hours, and I hope I haven't offended anybody in any way, shape, or form. I hope I've made it clear that the Atlanta police don't deserve any of this, because they didn't do any of it. They're simply, I think we've made this point many, many times, that their intent is to protect the protesters, to protect property, to protect innocent lives. And as long as people chant and speak their piece about
George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and others who they feel were victims of terrible injustice, I think the police are more than satisfied with that. I think the police chief is more than satisfied with that. The mayor and the governor too. That's the hallmark of this country. You're allowed to do that. Now, shouldn't throw a bottle at anybody. I mean, it's not a big deal in the context, as you point out, of what happened in Minneapolis. It seems like not even worth mentioning. But you know, police shouldn't have bottles thrown at them. That's not making that's not attaining any kind of justice for George Floyd. But what we're trying to do is put this in some kind of context, and I think you said it very well. What happened in Minneapolis was not anything that honored George Floyd. Walking out of a Target with a big screen TV may be a way of expressing frustration, but it's not just, and it's not lawful. So anyway.
And to be fair, some people may take advantage of an opportunity, whether they were part of a protest or not.
No question about it.
You know,
some of these people may not even be from here, right?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So, yeah. To be clear, violence is never condoned, and we would never make that statement. But again, to bring things back to focus and kind of describe what we're seeing now. People are just still gathered here, and it looks like they're holding up lights. It could be their cell phones. It probably is. But people are, you know, we've seen this a lot. People film, they live stream, they take pictures. They try to document what's going on because, quite frankly, we as the media are no longer the only way that you're getting information now. You're getting it from people who are on the ground, and that's another way that they feel they can express their message and get their message across without it being adulterated in any way. So that's become something that is quite common in protests across the country. As we continue to watch what's playing out here at the intersection by the CNN Center and Centennial Olympic Park.
Now, Sky Fox 5 has been our eye in the sky over all of this, and about half an hour ago or so, maybe a little bit longer ago than that, showed us some pictures of people protesting on the northbound lanes of the downtown connector just south of Georgia Tech and the Varsity there, just north of the turn at Cortlandt Avenue. I wonder whether we can even just turn in that direction and see whether some of that is still going on. Do we know whether that there were dozens of police vehicles and dozens of police officers on the interstate trying to clean that up? Perhaps Suzanne Gunn, our producer, is helping us through all this. Maybe you can give us some information if we know anything about the status of the connector, because we told that story and then moved back here because of the fires that we witnessed, that police car that was set on fire. That was all sort of happening around the same time about an hour ago. There was then another very small fire, but Atlanta Fire is on the scene. They put out that you can see that the foam right there at the top of your screen. You can see the foam behind those military style vehicles of that one police car that was engulfed in flames after having had the windshield broken along with several others. People stomping on them and really a few moments of chaos that was brought under control very quickly, in large part because Atlanta police had so many officers on the scene. And as I reported to you about 10 minutes ago, our understanding again is that the State Patrol has the SWAT team on the scene. So they are determined that this is not going to get out of control in the way that we have seen in other demonstrations around the country.
Yeah, we were hoping that what started as a peaceful protest would continue that way as we moved into the evening hours. And we are now approaching 9 o'clock. This started at around 4 o'clock this afternoon. We brought you images from Sky Fox 5 at that time showing people marching from Centennial Olympic Park to the state capitol, expressing their discontent, chanting. At one point there were prayers said. A very different scene than what we are witnessing right now. As the night began to, as we began to move further into the night, things took a different turn, and protesters began to damage property. They damaged several police cars. They burned one, as you can see right there, the remains of it, and they broke the windows at the CNN Center. Now people are sort of gathered, milling about in the intersection, sort of, you know, aimlessly there in one way or another. We saw kind of a jubilant scene earlier. People were dancing and listening to music at one point, as our reporter Alex Whitler on the ground told us. But things aren't necessarily that organized at this point. People are just there and they're refusing to leave, even though police have told them to do so. At different points, we heard reports that police had told protesters, if you don't go home, we will begin to make arrests. However, we didn't see arrests start to happen until they burned that police car. That was when police made a very aggressive physical push into the crowd, moving protesters back to the location they are at now. And that is how we've arrived where we are. Protesters in the intersection and police forming this line with police in riot gear, holding their shields in formation to prevent protesters from getting any further towards the CNN Center. And at one point, protesters had sort of maintained a position in front of the CNN Center, and police made an effort to keep anyone from getting inside that building, presumably to prevent them from going inside and doing further damage to that private property. So that is where we are now. As we approach 9 o'clock, we're expecting at any moment to hear from Police Chief Erica Shields and Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. They're supposed to give an update on what is happening, and we really look forward to hearing from them, to hear what their strategy is to respond to this, and maybe just to kind of let people know that they got the message, and protesters can now feel that they've accomplished their goal of getting attention of the top leadership here in our city, so that they can go home, and that no more property damage, no more trouble has to happen tonight.
Yeah, the push you described down Centennial Park Drive there resulted in several arrests, because some of the people who came, who may have been interested in being arrested to make a point in that particular way, they were arrested and are now in handcuffs, waiting for the bus to take them to the jail. But this has been a static situation now for about a half an hour since police came down and formed this cordon along Marietta Street, which goes from right to left, as we're looking at the screen. And I would have to believe that police are satisfied with the status quo at this point. People are standing in one place, having their say. Part of this demonstration, we have police on the other side at the bottom of your screen on Centennial Park Drive, keeping them from going too far in that direction. When people go into the park, they seem to be allowing them to do that. But generally speaking, this is very well contained at this point. And it would seem the police have achieved the kind of standoff they might have been hoping for, where people can protest as much as they want, but aren't free to do property damage to the CNN Center or to some of the surrounding buildings.
Yeah, unclear why, but it looks like some people are now running away further into the park, and our camera from Sky Fox 5 is capturing a little bit more of a chaotic energy now as people are running, kind of scattering, and it's just happened repeatedly throughout this whole experience. People running away at one point or another, and our reporter there heard at one point that they were running away from police, but we just never found out why. It's unclear why, but we did get a statement from Atlanta police earlier, just giving us a little bit more of an idea of what they were experiencing on the ground. They said that they had begun to push protesters away from a police vehicle at one point. Just to give you an idea of when this happened, this was around 7:45 p.m. They let us know what had happened just about an hour earlier. They said that their officers were trying to push protesters back. One was pushed to the ground. He sustained minor injuries. Protesters threw items at police at one point. And now I see another flame burning. They're sort of on the left side of the screen. Russ, I'm not sure if you're seeing that as well, but it almost looks like a torch that someone is holding.
Yeah. It doesn't look like it's something that's spreading at the moment, but yeah, it's something certainly we should keep our eye on. Let me share with you a tweet from Ambassador Andrew Young, Minister and Civil Rights Leader. This is a tweet. He was a confidant, of course, of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., former mayor of Atlanta. says Atlanta police have not been provocateurs. They have demonstrated exceptional restraint. Even the demonstrations in China have not gotten out of hand like this, and that's a shame. That from Andrew Young.
And Atlanta police just tweeted out that they plan to go live on Periscope on their Twitter feed. I'm not sure if that's referring to the briefing we're about to get from Chief Erica Shields and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, but they're just kind of putting the word out that they plan to go live on their Twitter feed in a few minutes just to give updates on the protests. So if that is in fact the briefing, then keep it right here. Keep it right here either way. But you know, to your point earlier, Russ, you were saying that it'd be interesting to know if police were trying to get their message to protesters in some kind of way through that briefing or in another kind of a live stream scenario. So, you know, maybe that's their push to get people to pull up the stream on their phones and hear their message, hear what they have to say. Maybe it can make a difference in getting some people, convincing some people to go home. You know, who knows?
Well, one more thing from Andrew Young, who has been widely respected in this city for decades on decades. Tonight and tomorrow night, we have to round up the reasonable young people who are part of that group and let them know that they have made their point and now they hurt their cause. He was referring, of course, to some of the damage that we witnessed here, and you can see firefighters still surrounding that police car that perhaps there were some embers there that they're trying to put out. But I've been surprised, Courtney, I'll tell you, I mean, we've been watching this now for quite a while. I've been surprised that the protesters have been content to stay in that one area. There's nothing keeping them from going down Marietta Street to the right that I can see, or back into the park. The face-off with police is one thing. Perhaps there's some satisfaction in that. But they must know that they're not going that direction. They've already been pushed back down to the intersection. Perhaps the confrontation is the thing, but they're in a stalemate now, and it at least for the moment, it's seemingly a calmer stalemate. So we'll hear what the police chief and the mayor have to say about what they plan to do as the night wears on, because the ones who stick around, frankly, well, now I'm getting ready to express another opinion, so maybe I should keep my mouth shut. But what I was going to say, and I'll say it anyway, the ones that stick around the longest may not be the most reasonable in the crowd. There you have it.
Some things are opinions, Russ, and others are just common sense. Right. So I don't think you have to feel too bad on your journalistic standards.
All right, thank you.
But, you know, I mean, and you can also look at history. You can look at previous demonstrations. Crowds tend to have sort of an energy to them. There's sort of a dynamic that carries over from one to the next, and maybe that's just human nature. But, you know, when I think about other protests and demonstrations that I have covered, some of them in St. Louis, you know, similar background, people protesting police brutality and, you know, police showing up in riot gear. It's the same scene that we've seen before. This is not necessarily brand new to us. We've seen these images before. And so, you know, you tend to know these things go one way or another. People either go home peacefully or they get arrested or they get pepper sprayed or police start going into the crowd with batons. And I'm sure police don't want to see things get escalated to that point. They would like people to go home without incident. Well, it's not without incident at this point, but they would like people to peacefully go home. And it looks like whoever had the fire earlier still has it, and it's not clear if that fire is now burning on its own, but it does look like it's gotten a little bigger than it was before. So we're keeping our eye on that too. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned things we've seen before in past protests in the city of Atlanta. Protesters have gotten onto the downtown connector, and we showed that about an hour ago. This, I believe, is from the 10th Street Bridge, looking down at the northbound lanes of the downtown connector. You can see protesters on the street, and you can see the flashing lights of what look like at least a couple dozen Atlanta police cars. People honking their horns, but the protesters are getting what they want, which is a lot of attention there. Just south of the Varsity, as we're looking down, that's the William Street exit on the right, heading southbound. We're told that this is all cleared up. Took them a while, but Atlanta police on the scene, plenty of them. It looked like as many of them, honestly, at one point as there were protesters, but that's all been cleared up, Courtney.
Yeah, and now it looks like some people are moving away slowly from the crowd. We're going to go now to Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. Let's listen.
And when I saw the murder of George Floyd, I hurt like a mother would hurt. And on yesterday, when I heard there were rumors about violent protests in Atlanta, I did what a mother would do. I called my son and I said, "Where are you?" I said, "I cannot protect you, and black boys shouldn't be out today. So you're not going to out-concern me and out-care about where we are in America." I wear this each and every day, and I pray over my children each and every day. So what I see happening on the streets of Atlanta is not Atlanta. This is not a protest. This is not in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. This is chaos. A protest has purpose. When Dr. King was assassinated, we didn't do this to our city. So if you love this city that has had a legacy of black mayors and black police chiefs and people who care about this city, where more than 50% of the business owners in Metro Atlanta are minority business owners. If you care about this city, then go home and pray that somebody like Reverend Beasley will come and talk to you and give you some instructions on what a protest should look like and how you effectuate change in America. This police chief made a video on yesterday, pull it up on YouTube, where she said she was appalled to watch the murder of George Floyd. This woman did that. You're not honoring the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. You're not protesting anything running out with brown liquor in your hands, breaking windows in this city. T.I. and Killer Mike own half the West Side. So when you burn down this city, you're burning down our community. If you want change in America, go and register to vote. Show up at the polls on June 9th. Do it in November. That is the change we need in this country. You are disgracing our city. You are disgracing the life of George Floyd and every other person who has been killed in this country. We are better than this. We're better than this as a city. We are better than this as a country. Go home. Go home. In the same way I couldn't protect my son on yesterday, I cannot protect you out in those streets. You're throwing knives at our police officers. You are burning cars. You have defaced the CNN building. Ted Turner started CNN in Atlanta 40 years ago because he believed in who we are as a city. There was a black reporter who was arrested on camera this morning who works for CNN. They are telling our stories, and you are disgracing their building. This is not the legacy of civil rights in America. This is chaos, and we're buying into it. This won't change anything. We're no longer talking about the murder of an innocent man. We're talking about how you're burning police cars on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. Go home. You all want to say anything?
I've already said what I had to say. Atlanta is the place where people like me, Killer Mike, other artists, creatives, other people who come from our culture, and other people who rise up out of the wreckage of the struggle that we all experience just by being born a certain color in this country. But Atlanta is a place where we can set an example of prosperity, and we've done that for generations. People like Dr. King, Maynard Jackson, Ambassador Young have paved the way for us. When everything else goes away, when you don't get treated right in New York, when you don't get treated right in LA, when you can't get treated right in Detroit, when you don't get treated right in St. Louis, when you don't get treated right in Alabama, Atlanta has been here for us. This city don't deserve it. However, I understand that a lot of others do. But we can't do this here. This is Wakanda. It's sacred. It must be protected.
I didn't want to come, and I don't want to be here. I'm the son of an Atlanta City police officer. My cousin is an Atlanta City police officer, and my other cousin, East Point police officer. And I got a lot of love and respect for police officers, down to the original 8 police officers in Atlanta that even after becoming police had to dress in a YMCA because white officers didn't want to get dressed with niggers. And here we are 80 years later. I watched a white officer assassinate a black man, and I know that tore your heart out. And I know it's crippling. And I have nothing positive to say in this moment because I don't want to be here. But I'm responsible to be here because it wasn't just Dr. King and people dressed nicely who marched and protested to progress this city and so many other cities. It was people like my grandmother, people like my aunts and uncles who were members of SCLC and NAACP, and in particular, Reverend James Orange, Mrs. Alice Johnson, and Reverend Love, who we just lost last year. So I'm duty-bound to be here to simply say that it is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with an enemy. It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. And now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. It is time to beat up prosecutors you don't like at the voting booth. It is time to hold mayoral offices accountable, chiefs and deputy chiefs. Atlanta is not perfect, but we're a lot better than we ever were, and we're a lot better than cities are. I'm mad as hell. I woke up wanting to see the world burn down yesterday because I'm tired of seeing black men die. He casually put his knee on a human being's neck for 9 minutes as he died like a zebra in the clutch of a lion's jaw. And we watch it like murder porn over and over again. So that's why children are burning to the ground. They don't know what else to do. And it is the responsibility of us to make this better right now. We don't want to see one officer charged. We want to see 4 officers prosecuted and sentenced. We don't want to see targets burning. We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground. And as I sit here in Georgia, home of Stevens, Georgia, former vice president of the Confederacy, white man said that law, fundamental law, stated that whites were naturally the superior race, and the Confederacy was built on a cornerstone. It's called a cornerstone speech. Look it up. The cornerstone speech that blacks would always be subordinate. That officer believed that speech because he killed that man like an animal. In this city, officers have done horrendous things and they have been prosecuted. This city's cut different. In this city, you can find over 50 restaurants owned by black women. I didn't say minority, and I didn't say women of color. So after you burn down your own home, what do you have left but char and ash. CNN, Ted did a great thing. I love CNN, I love Cartoon Network, but I'd like to say to CNN right now, karma's a mother. Stop feeding fear and anger every day. Stop making people feel so fearful. Give them hope. I'm glad they only took down a sign and defaced a building and they're not killing human beings like that policeman did. I'm glad that they only destroyed some brick and mortar and they didn't rip a father from a son. They didn't rip a son from a mother like the policeman did. When a man yells for his mother in duress and pain and she's dead, he is essentially yelling, please God, don't let it happen to me. And we watch that. So my question for us on the other side of this camera is, after it burns, will we be left with charred, or will we rise like a phoenix out of the ashes that Atlanta has always done? Will we use this as a moment to say that we will not do what other cities have done, and in fact, we will get better than we've been? We got good enough to destroy cash bonds. You don't have to worry about going to jail for something petty. We got smart enough to decriminalize marijuana. How smart are we going to be in the next 15 or 20 years to keep us ahead of this curve? So that much like when South Africa suffered apartheid, you had Andy and other politicians that could make sure that Atlanta said, Coca-Cola, we love you, but if you don't pull out of South Africa, we're going to leave. We're not going to drink Coca-Cola anymore. Coca-Cola jumped on their side and apartheid ended. So we have an opportunity now. Because I'm mad, I don't have any good advice. But what I can tell you is that if you sit in your homes tonight, instead of burning your home to the ground, you will have time to properly plot, plan, strategize, and organize and mobilize in an effective way. And two of the most effective ways is first taking your butt to the computer and making sure you fill out your census so that people know who you are and where you are. The next thing is making sure you exercise your political bully power and going to local elections and beating up the politicians that you don't like. You got a prosecutor sent your partner to jail and you know it was bullshit, put a new prosecutor in there. Now's your election to do it. You want a different senator that's more progressive, that promotes marijuana through, now is the time to do that. But it is not time to burn down your own home. I love and I respect you. I hate I don't have more to say. I hate I can't fix it in a snap. I hate Atlanta's not perfect for as good as we are. But we have to be better than this moment. We have to be better than burning down our own homes. Because if we lose Atlanta, what else we got? We lose an ability to plot, to plan, to strategize, to organize, and to properly mobilize. I want you to go home. I want you to talk to 10 of your friends. I want you guys to come up with real solutions. I would like for the Atlanta City Police Department to bring back the Community Review Board, one that Alice Johnson was formerly under Chief Turner. We need a review board here because we need to get ahead of it before an officer does some stupid shit. We need to get ahead of it. That's my recommendation to my mayor and my chief. Let's get a review board. Let's get ahead of it, and let's give them power. We don't need an officer that makes a mistake once, twice, 3 times, and finally he kills a boy on national TV, and the next thing you know, the country is burning down. We don't need a dumbass president repeating what segregationists said. When you start looting, we start shooting. But the problem is some officers black and some people going to shoot back. And that's not good for our community either. I love and respect you all. I hope that we find a way out of it because I don't have the answers, but I do know we must plot. We must plan, we must strategize, organize, and mobilize. Thank you for allowing me some time to speak. I'd like to appreciate our chief for what she said on YouTube. I thought it was very bold to do. I'd like to appreciate our mayor for talking to us like a black mama and telling us to take our ass at home. And I'd like to thank my friend for convincing me to come here. And I'll defer to Joe Beasley now because he knows a hell of a lot more than we do. Thank y'all.
Well, thank you very much. I guess I'm one of the fortunate ones that grew up here in metropolitan Atlanta 83 years ago. So I've really seen real change. And I appreciate Mayor Bottoms for asking me to come and stand here with the group because, change is here. I remember very well when we couldn't even venture in this building. But now the mayor is the mayor of this city. I think we've got a great chief here. And I think that the word from the mayor is to go home. because when you're in a crowd, the adrenaline is pumping, and you didn't really mean to get in trouble when you came out. But in fact, when you're following the crowd, you know, whatever the crowd does that you're with, you're going to be a part of it. And so I would urge you to stay calm. The nation is changing, and I want you to be a part of the change and not be a statistic. Thank you.
We're joined by Reverend Dr. Bernice King. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and I want to thank the mayor for calling us together. This is a tough moment, and if I might take one liberty to just say